So I'll just get started. May as well. Good evening, everyone. My name is Danielle, and I work for Gold Coast Libraries as a Program Development Officer. I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Yugambeh people, the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, and pay my respect to their elders past and present, and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. So tonight's event is part of Gold Coast Library's Start and Grow Your Business program. So whether you've got a business idea, a side hustle, or a small business you'd like to grow, Gold Coast Libraries can help you access information, resources, and support to help you develop your business skills and achieve your business goals. So to find out more, head to our website, cityofgoldcoast.com.au/start and grow. And this month is also Queensland Small Business Month. So we do have a range of events across the month. You can also head to that website to find out more about our other events. So tonight we have Tim Duggan with us, and he is joining us from Sydney, which I hear apparently it's a bit wet down there as well, like it is here on the Gold Coast. Tim Duggan is the co-founder and publisher at Junkie Media, one of Australia's leading publishers and content agencies, reaching over 4 million Australians every week. Tim also wrote Cult Status, which won the Best Small Business and Entrepreneurship Book of the Year 2021 at the Australian Business Book Awards. So in addition to that, congratulations on your newest book, Killer Thinking. Tim, welcome, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here on a cold, wet night for both of us from the sounds of it.
Yes, it is, exactly. So I hope everyone's at home and snuggly. It's nice to have a virtual event on tonight, actually.
It is.
So I have, as I mentioned before, I've read most of your book and found it excellent. You wrote most of this book whilst travelling around Australia with your husband, Ben, in a camper van. Was that always the plan, to travel and write at the same time, or did it come about spontaneously? Did you start writing and go, I can't do this, I need to travel, or what came first?
It was a little bit of both, to be honest. So we had grand plans like the rest of the world did in 2020 of what life was going to look like. We were married in March 2020 on the weekend just before weddings got cancelled in New South Wales and around Australia for the next year and a half or so. And we had plans originally to head over to Europe to be closer to, my husband is Scottish. We wanted to be closer to his family in Europe for a couple of years. So we had these grand plans of heading overseas. And when COVID happened and everyone's plans got upended, we decided that we were going to jump into a camper van for 6 weeks and travel around New South Wales. That was what all you could do at the time, because you couldn't leave the state's borders. So we jumped into a camper van. I'd never really been in a camper van before. And we spent 6 weeks traveling around New South Wales. And then when we got to the end of the 6 weeks, we were having so much fun, and we were seeing such a beautiful side of Australia, really from the ground, that we decided to keep going. So Victoria opened up, went into Victoria, went to Northern Territory, went across to WA. So before we knew it, a 6-week trip turned into 6 months. And it was whilst I was traveling that I started to have all these ideas for what would become Killer Thinking. So it was just, I talk about this a lot in the book around the need for space and the need for, to kind of get new ideas percolating in your head. You just need new things to look at and new paths to go down. And that's what you really get when you're traveling.
Oh, definitely. So it definitely helped your writing then.
It really did. Yeah, it's pretty, back of a camper van is a pretty amazing place to write a book, and I recommend anyone also to get out and go camping as a way of just washing away the city and letting new ideas wash in.
Yeah, exactly. Was there a favorite place for you that was most inspirational?
I mean, I'm giving all respect to Queensland. Queensland wasn't on the agenda this time. We had to save something for the next trip. So we saved Queensland, South Australia and Tasmania for the next one. So those aside, we just loved Western Australia. The coast of West Australia from Esperance up to Exmouth is just the most stunning coastland and beautiful waters and swimming. And we did a lot of, diving and snorkeling and things like that. So the ocean over there is just amazing, even with the sharks.
Yes, it sounds like the perfect place to write a book, especially about ideas. So Killer Thinking is more than just a great title, which, when I first saw it, I thought, oh yeah, Killer Thinking. But it's actually your method for creating not good, but really great ideas. So Killer being an acronym for, so you've got kind, impactful, loved, lasting, easy, and repeatable. Can you tell us more how you came up with this method?
Yeah, I love trying to make complicated things seem simple. It's a real aim in my life. I think that there's too much complication in this world. There's too much noise. There's too many things going on. So what I try and do is think through what are some things that are quite complicated as theories, and how can you break them down and make them really easily understood and easily remembered by people. So I was throwing around this concept of what are the best ideas in the world. So, anything from non-profit or for impact ideas to for-profit ideas. And my head started going crazy with things like Movember, which I think is one of the best ideas in the world.
Yeah.
Things like this thing called La Ciclovia over in Bogota in Colombia, which is where they shut the streets down every Sunday to all cars, and a couple of million people come out to the streets every single week, through to things like Keep Cup, which is like such a brilliant idea. So I started with the ideas first, and I started looking at all of these brilliant ideas in the world. And then I wanted to really try and unpack them all and figure out what do they all have in common. So I started going through and I started being like, okay, so they're all really repeatable. They are all really, they're kind at their core. They are all really loved by their community. And when I started putting it together, I realized through the process of writing it that if I wanted people to remember what a killer idea was, I had to make it memorable. And that's where the concept of kind, impactful, loved, lasting, easy, and repeatable came from.
Yeah, I love it. And like you said, simple steps, and then you've got in there your key to killer thinking, and there's 8 simple steps underneath that. I love that you have kindness in there, and you say it's missing from traditional businesses. Can you sort of tell us why you think it's so important and how businesses can be kind?
When you think of businesses, you tend to think of competitive, win at all costs, winner takes all, zero-sum game. It's about a fight. It's all about how you're going to take more money off your competitor or take market share off them. And that, to me, is an old way of thinking about business. That is the way that you've got us to where we are now, where we've got lots of problems with our capitalist society. We won't go into all the problems. We don't have enough time, but there's so many problems out there. And when I started looking at, not only for killer thinking, but for my first book, Cult Status, at some of these businesses that were really thriving and taking people to where we want to go as opposed to where we've been, I realized that kindness, so being kind to the environment, being kind to the community that we're part of, being kind to our customers, being kind to our staff, being kind to each other, all of that is actually a really important part of business, and particularly the businesses that are growing and will be successful over the next few decades. And it's not often spoken about. I feel like kindness is kind of one of those, a bit soft, touchy, feely kind of things that people just, you might say your grandmother's kind or something like that. Whereas I wanted to really hold up people who were kind, businesses who were kind, and so that hopefully we can get more of those types of businesses celebrated and people growing kind businesses.
Yeah, and it starts off the acronym perfectly, followed on by impactful and loved and lasting, easy, repeatable. They're just all really nice words as well. So I love it.
Yeah, so, and easy to remember as well. I really want
to remember.
Want to make something that was easy to remember, because I've had the book only came out a week ago, and I've already had emails and Instagram messages from people who have said it's really had them started to think about how they are thinking about ideas and reconsider, like, the ideas they're coming up with. Are they kind? How do I make this repeatable? Is this easy? It's very easy to complicate things. It's very hard to make things easy. And that is, if you can have like a bit of a filter, as I talk about in the book, that you could put your ideas through, that's going to make all your ideas better.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's such a great way for people to easily define, hang on, is this a good idea? Does it meet all those things? And when you get to that, all of those, and you can go, yeah, this is what the definition of a killer idea is, all of those words. So yeah, I love it.
Yeah,
so coming up with creative and useful ideas can be a challenge, but you believe everyone has the ability to be creative. But can you tell us what does creativity mean to you? Oh, you're frozen. Are you there? Did you hear me?
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you now.
My connection seems to be, yes.
That's all good.
Right. It's a little bit frozen at this end. I would say it's the we're interacting with each other.
I think it is.
But as long as you can hear me.
I can now.
Oh, great.
Okay, yeah. Awesome.
Danny's saying we can hear you both.
I think,
okay.
Yep. Okay. I think we're good. Someone's saying in the chat that they can hear us both, so that's okay. I just lost you for a moment, so that's
okay. Great. I think you're back now.
Back.
I think, yeah, you're back.
Yep.
So your question was, what does creativity mean to me?
Yeah. Like, what? How do you define creativity? Or yeah.
Yeah. I there's so many different definitions of creativity, and I think the simplest one actually comes from Steve Jobs, which is creativity is combining two things together to come up with something new. And I love that definition because it demystifies creativity. It stops it being this thing that only creative people can do. If you go and sit in a cave and you can paint, then you are a creative. When instead it's just thinking about, here's one idea, here's another idea. What would happen if we put them together would create something new and something exciting. So that's kind of my very simple definition of creativity, which I've stolen from Steve Jobs.
Yeah, and again, it's really simple and easy. You just make it sound so simple, and yeah, I love it. But you also talk in the book about boredom, the importance of boredom, and how you believe it's the mother of creativity. You even spent a few weeks alone on a desert island just to see what would happen. Can you tell us more about this experience and what you got out of it?
It was actually up in Queensland. I can thank Queensland for that.
I wanted to know, where is this desert island?
Yeah, it was one of the islands in the Great Barrier Reef that I got permission to camp on from the National Parks and Wildlife Service. This was about 15 years ago. Wow, that makes me sound old. That makes me feel old.
Yeah.
So I camped there for a few weeks. It very quickly made me realize why some islands are deserted, because they're very exposed and there's not much to do on them. So it was actually me in a tent, and I wanted to get bored. So I brought no books, no music, no phone. I had a satellite phone in case I needed to call someone, just a pad and a pen. And the first week or so was one of the worst weeks of my life. It was terrible. I got so bored. I got angry at myself. I got I was kind of kicking myself. Why am I doing this? I've done this to myself. No one's forced me to do this. All of these, like, beating up on myself. Yeah. And then I just kind of had this epiphany one day when I went around to one side of the island, which was beautifully silent. Up until then, the wind was roaring through the island most of the time. So I didn't even have time to think. And I went around to one side of the island, and it was so silent all of a sudden. And the whole experience just flipped for me. And it became this, like, almost spiritual experience of kind of getting in touch with myself. And so I just really loved everything about that, that time spent on the island. However, one of the things that it taught me was how important it is to just sit with your own thoughts, away from, and obviously going to an island by yourself is probably the extreme version of that. But you can also do this by going into your room and closing your door, or turning your phone off. Like, the concept of turning a phone off scares most people. It scares me. What if someone calls me? What if there's an emergency? What if there's something? But we need to disconnect and unplug, and we need to find our own time to get bored. So I'm a big advocate now of getting bored. I've got these kind of ideas of starting some event series soon where we get people together in a room and do absolutely nothing.
Nothing. I
We
love
call
it.
them, yeah, like a boring event.
So
And
come and be bored.
come and be bored. Yeah, I kind of
I'm
just,
interested to see how that goes and how
yeah,
well your sales go on that one. That'll be, yeah.
yeah, I
But
totally.
you've even said just and something simple to me was just go for a walk without listening to music or without listening to a podcast. And I was like, oh, that's something I didn't think of. Like
And
you always want
how crazy is that? So I put my headphones in and
to,
I put them on noise cancelling and I don't put anything in them.
yeah,
And that to me blocks out a lot of the world. So
yeah,
I'm not then aware of kind of what's going on. And that to me is me getting inside my own head. But how crazy is it that we need to remind ourselves to go for a walk and not do something at the same time?
yeah.
We're so used to multitasking. We're so used to feeding our brains information at all times. When we go to work, when we're having a bath, are we listening to an audiobook? When we are in the car, we're listening to radio.
We have to fill every minute, don't we? With something. It's like, finish this, move to the next thing. It's like to stop and just be is not okay. People aren't comfortable with that. So it's definitely something to work on, I suppose, and get more used to as the more you do it.
And get comfortable with it. Get comfortable with that is where ideas come from. If you're trying to solve a problem, if you want to think of a name for something, if you want to be creative, if you want to think of a business idea, if you want to figure out how to solve something in your relationship, you need time alone before you do anything else. So one of the second step in the book is around fit your own mask first. Once you've kind of identified what a problem is, it's around trying to solve the problem yourself first, by yourself, by getting bored, by going for a walk without listening to music, by going for a drive without putting on radio. That to me is a really amazing time, especially maybe in a city is a bit hard, but when you get onto a freeway, go into a freeway and you kind of go a bit into automatic mode, especially if you've got cruise control on or something like that. That to me is wonderfully creative time. Yeah,
definitely. So you, again, and I'll just let everyone know we can ask, I'm going to give you some time to ask questions, don't worry. You, again, believe anyone can come up with new and useful ideas, but it's how you come up with those ideas that count. And that means what you believe, losing the traditional brainstorming sessions. And I found that interesting because it's so common in many workplaces to have brainstorming sessions. Can you sort of briefly explain why you don't believe in the good old-fashioned brainstorming session?
I used to love a brainstorming session. It's a very good technique invented in the 1940s by a guy called Alex Osborne, who was an advertising executive. I've been reading all of his books that he wrote. He wrote quite a few books about creativity. Most of them are pretty good. He has some outdated thoughts, like only men should be invited to brainstorms.
Okay.
He was written in the 1940s.
Yes.
But I used to like them. I used to think they were kind of okay. And then I sat in hundreds of them. And when you sit in hundreds of them, you realize all of the problems with them. And there's so many problems with brainstorms. Things like they normally go all over the place. So there's like not much focus. Things like introverts normally get forgotten in it. Things like there's a thing called a HIPPO, which I talk about in the book, which stands for highest paid person's opinion, which tends to dominate when you're there. Things like groupthink, of everyone kind of like thinking the same way. Things like going after the wrong problem instead of what you're actually talking about. And then probably the most important factor is the hybrid work life that we're all into now, where some people will be on Zoom, some people in an office. Either everyone will be on Zoom, very rare for everyone to be in an office together at the same time these days. So you're most likely going to have some at home and some in the office. And we just need a better technique for creative ideation than brainstorms. So that kind of got me thinking over the past 2 years. When I got out of the camper van, I spent a bunch of time in companies of all different sizes, from small 2-person companies through to large 1,000 people plus companies, experimenting with them. I did brainstorms. I did traditional brainstorms. I did lots of new techniques I found on the internet. I did problem solving techniques and tried to kind of figure out what was the best way of coming up with ideas together as a group. And that's a method that I introduced in the book called a celebration, which is a mashing of two words, celebration, like a party, and cerebral, to kind of think. So it's like a thinking party. And celebration is a really fun, simple model. And I actually took a group through it this morning, did a workshop with a group. And it's really fun to do in real life.
Yeah, that's excellent. It certainly flips things around and makes you think about it in a different way. I hadn't thought about a brainstorming session like that before, but it's so true. All of those factors can really hinder the process. Yeah,
and I would love for that. My aim with this book is for that process to people to just use it. I try to give as many tools for people to use, to read this and be like, you know what, next time I'm at work, next time I'm trying to come up with something, I'm going to run a celebration session. And there's three really simple parts. They're in the book, but three really simple parts to it that hopefully kind of anyone should be able to understand.
Yeah, definitely. I want to use that for my work next time.
Yeah, amazing.
So Tim, you're a firm believer in the power of business to do good. And, you talk a lot about that in your first book, Cult Status. And you believe that, businesses can have a positive impact or should have a positive impact these days on society or the environment. And that the best ideas in the world have a clear purpose beyond just making money. How do you think consumers today have changed the way businesses are or should be operating?
Consumers have really changed. Consumers are driving all of this. So my first book, Cult Status, came out of research that we had done over 10 years with Australian millennials. So I'm 41. I always call myself the world's oldest living millennial. And from my age down, is the people that we've researched over the past 10 years. And not that it's only affecting millennials. It's just that is the forefront of the people who are the consumers who are demanding more and expecting more from businesses that they interact with. And so all of our research showed us that young people in particular really wanted businesses that they purchased from to act ethically, act with integrity, really care about the environment, really care about their place in the community. And they were starting to vote with their wallets. And so a lot of the businesses that I originally flew around the world in 2019, so 3 years ago, and spoke to, all because I thought that they were building these really strong communities of people that ethically agreed with what they were doing. Most of the businesses in Cult Status, because I'm writing a little update at the moment, have exploded in popularity. So anything from Allbirds, which is a shoe company who make the shoes out of really environmentally sustainable material like wool and eucalyptus trees. They listed on the stock exchange in the US and are worth multi-billions of dollars. Zoe Foster Blake's company, GoTo, which is the skincare brand, she sold 50% of it for $80 million or something like that. So not that it's just about money, but what that shows is there is really strong consumer demand behind businesses that are about more than just money. The businesses that actually do want to do good, with how they exist as an entire business in the ecosystem.
Yeah, and I think we've seen that even more so in the past 2 years with the pandemic. I know I've noticed, a lot more brands sort of coming up and thriving who are in that space of not only are they providing a product or a service, they're actually impacting, the environment or society in some other way. So it's been really interesting. So you've done your research for this book, clearly. It's full of real world experiences and accounts and really shows how creativity can look different for everyone. You've got in there, one example of Ed Sheeran, who views creativity like a dirty tap. Sarah Wilson, who admits her process is really loose and messy, but it gets the job done. Even Jerry Seinfeld has tricks to keep his creativity on track. What's your ritual for getting into a creative mood so you can come up with your killer ideas?
Oh, what a great question, because I've loved researching everyone's unique ways of thinking about creativity, and everyone has a really fascinating way of doing it. Mine is, and I talk about this a little bit in the book, is that I try to fool my brain into being creative. And the way that I do it is try to link it with my senses. So when I want to be creative, I have one soundtrack that I play, the same soundtrack. It's Missy Higgins, one of her albums. And when my husband hears me put it on, he's just like, okay, Tim's going into his zone.
Yeah.
And that's intentional. It's like every note it's like puts me into a trance almost. And the second thing I do is I put a candle on or incense burner and have a smell. And for me, my creative ritual is trying to fool my senses into, I'm a big believer in, if you need to kind of create an entire ritual around that. For me, it's the same soundtrack and it's a really nice smell. And as soon as I have those, I'm kind of like transported. I'm no longer trying to get on top of my emails. I'm no longer looking at spreadsheets. I'm kind of going deep into, okay, my mind is in a different mode.
Yeah, and you also talk about how you set, a period of time so that you're not just sort of dragging on and on. And that's another great technique.
Yeah, that was actually, I think, one of Seinfeld.
Oh, that was Seinfeld. Sorry.
Yeah, Seinfeld. Jerry Seinfeld said, when you go to the gym, you don't say to the personal trainer. The personal trainer doesn't say to you, come along, let's come for a couple of hours and see what happens. Personal trainer says, you're here from 8 a.m. to 8:45.
Yeah.
And that's how he thinks about creativity. And I loved that. It was a really nice way of creativity is often this loose kind of like mystical thing that happens up here that people don't know. And then you speak to every single person I spoke to for this book, every single bit of research that I did said it's a muscle. It's not this crazy thing that you can't control. You just need to put the hard yards in and actually do it. And that's quite amazing because it's the most creative people in the world say that. They find it hard. They've got to try to carve time out for it. But the only way of being creative is getting off your bum and actually doing it. And
finding what works for you. So I just sort of let everyone know, if you have any questions, you can pop them through in the chat, or there is a Q&A feature down the bottom of your screen as well. And I'll read them out to Tim if you have any. But whilst you might be thinking of some, another question, one other sort of interesting point I had was, so step one in your key to killer thinking is be your problem's therapist. So before you dive into finding that creative solution to your problem, you recommend starting by looking at solutions that exist for it already. And you kind of mentioned it earlier when you say look at two different solutions, I suppose, and combine them. And this can be contrary to other business advice when you might think, oh, I've got this idea, but there's already something for that. Can you give us any examples of how you have seen this work? For example, I know you do mention the dating apps in your book.
Almost nothing in this world is a completely new idea. There's a great book by Austin Kleon called Everything is a Remix. And he really talks about this idea that the best ideas in the world are kind of extensions of other people's ideas. Same with business ideas. It's very rare to have a completely new idea. And as soon as you do something, someone's going to copy it. That's okay. That's the world that we live in. Yep. What you need to do in order to come up with ideas or do when you're doing research is looking around and seeing what's not been done or what's a little twist that you can add to something to make it better. And that is the first step of this, is be your problems therapist, which is you need to understand the problem that you're trying to solve. And everything is a problem. Everything's a problem. Every creative idea comes from a problem. It doesn't just come from, this would be nice. Everything kind of starts at the start of what am I trying to solve? And you need to do the research at the beginning, absorb as much information as you can, look online, go to libraries, go to the Gold Coast Library and look up as much information as you can. Use every resource that you have available to yourself to really try to go deep on an issue. Because it's when you go deep into the issue that sometimes you can find the answer in the research itself.
Yeah, it makes sense. And it's something I guess a lot of people, you just wouldn't think of that. You wouldn't think that you could do that. But killer ideas, they're not just for coming up with business ideas. It is for anyone who wants to solve a problem at work or at home. In what ways have you seen any other killer ideas in situations outside of the business space? And what other suggestions do you have for listeners today who want to use your method, to help solve problems maybe in their workplace or even their personal lives?
Yeah, it's the same way of thinking, because problem-solving techniques are generally used in workplaces, because workplaces are very problem solution focused. But if you think about it, every part of your life has problems in it. You try not to think too much, but your relationship, your home, your child, there's problems that we're facing all day, every day. I'm not trying to be too negative about this whole thing. But if you can apply the same thinking, it doesn't need to be in an office to solve a problem. It can be kind of anything going on. There's a really great example in the book that I give. This is a work situation, but it's kind of like not a normal problem solving, of Becky Richards, who was the nurse in San Francisco, who helped solve the problem of how to give nurses more headspace and less distractions when they're going around doing medication rounds. And she came up with a really simple solution, which was, and it's used to this day, and it's been modified, and I talk in the book a little bit how it was massaged and refined. But her idea of giving every nurse who's doing the medication round a really clear, bright colored vest that says, "Do not disturb me, I'm on a medication round." Everyone told her she was a bit crazy. People didn't think it was working. The nurses, when they first tried it in their first trial, thought that it was doing the opposite, that it was drawing more attention to them. And that simple thought of, well, why don't we try to almost counterintuitively put attention on the nurses to make them not be distracted? That simple change of wearing those vests for nurses has saved thousands and thousands of lives and decreased the medication risk by something like 80% from hospitals that wear it versus hospitals that don't. Yeah, and so that's a really great example to me of, that's not an office. That is a nurse who thought, well, why don't we try this as an idea? Didn't quite think it was going to work. And the result has literally saved thousands of lives. It's an anti-killer idea.
It is. So how did you actually find out about that example?
That was one during my research. It was in one of the books I was listening to. I was listening to an audiobook, and I just loved the idea. I think it was in Indistractable was the book by, I can't remember the author's name. And it's this really great book that when I'm in that mode of trying to find out about these things, I absorb as much information as possible. I listen to audiobooks, I read, I go deep into research. And for this book, I had a research assistant who went deep into as much creative research as she could find and then report back to me on important things I need to look for. So yeah, I'm like a bowerbird when I'm in that mode, where I'm just like collecting all these pieces of information, bringing them back to my nest, and then seeing how I can kind of pick through them for information.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes your book so great, is that it's so well researched. So on that topic of, you say you read a lot of books and listen to audiobooks. Do you have any books, business or other, that has influenced or inspired you in your life?
I have loads of books. Let me try and narrow them down to a couple. One called The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod. It's a little bit self-helpy, a little bit woo-woo at times, but it's all about how to become a morning person, a proper morning person.
Yep.
And I wrote my first book, Cult Status, whilst I was working full-time. And the only time I could find was by waking up at 4:30 in the morning and writing for a couple of hours before work every day for about a year or two.
Yeah.
And this book kind of made me not scared of 4 something in the morning. It's kind of like, and it's about, you wake up in the morning and he's got an acronym which is called SAVERS. I think it's which is like silence, affirmations, visualizations, exercise. And maybe the first one's scribing. There's all these things to do. Some of them are a bit woo-woo for me, like affirmations and visualizations I don't really do, but I would scribe, I would write in a journal, I would meditate, and then I'd go to the gym. And that book, a little bit woo-woo, but I quite enjoyed it.
But it worked.
But it worked.
Yeah. Miracle Morning. Okay.
Miracle Morning. Yeah. The other book, which I really loved over many years, these are all like non-fiction business books. So, I won't give you my favorite fiction books here because the other one was called Getting Things Done by David Allen. And it's a productivity book on how, just a really simple productivity method of how to deal with the barrage of stuff coming at us at all times. And I used to reread that book about once a year to use it as a little bit like Marie Kondo, kind of, simplifying and throwing things out and kind of things like that. But it's a really great organizational book that I loved. I reread it recently, and I don't know how much it's kept up with the modern electronic world. Like, it was kind of written, email was still a thing, but he talks a lot about like mail and things like that. So it's a little bit old school, but the principles in it are still pretty amazing.
Still amazing. So do you have anything you're currently reading?
I just read the audiobook for Killer Thinking, which comes out tomorrow. So I usually read Killer Thinking, but I don't know if I can say my own book.
Yeah. You can.
Yeah, and I just also finished The Happiest Man on Earth, which is a wonderful, sad, beautiful book.
Yes, I read that book. It was a really nice book.
Yeah, I loved it. I read it in one sitting when I was away in a tiny cabin last weekend, and I was crying. I kept having to turn to my husband about every 2 minutes to tell him what was happening in the book. It's so sad, but uplifting and affirming and all of those things.
Yes, I really enjoyed it as well. Do you listen to any podcasts?
I listen to a lot of podcasts. A lot?
Any you recommend or?
I love a lot of news podcasts. So things like 7 a.m. And The Daily, which is the New York Times one. I listen to a lot of American politics podcasts. So the one called Pod Save America, which is a bunch of guys who used to be Obama's speech writers. And they kind of helped me get through the Trump era with their kind of analysis of all of that. I feel like I'm listening to Friends every time I put them on. I find them quite amazing. I also love Shameless, which are two Melbourne journalists who do a kind of pop culture podcast once or twice a week. And they've built this really amazing little mini media empire. And they were in Cult Status in the first book. And I just love listening to them and supporting the amazing stuff that they're doing.
Yeah, okay, I'll have to check that one out. So what's next for you, Tim? Do you have any more books coming up? Any more on the cards, do you think?
I do, yes. I'm chatting with my publisher at the moment about what a third book might look like. The process it's about a 2-year process to kind of like thinking of an idea, writing it, publishing it. So you have to think quite far in advance. So I'm thinking about what a possible next book would look like, which is very fun. I am the question there, am I still working and writing, or is writing full time?
Yes.
Thanks, Sunny. I am writing I wouldn't say full time, but writing is my passion and I really love it. So I actually finished full-time work when I sold Junkie Media in 2016. I stayed around for 4 years. Then the end of October 2020, I left full-time work at Junkie and have just been basically writing since then, doing a bunch of consulting for companies that I find really interesting, a bunch of investing in some companies and mentoring some people who I think are building really interesting businesses. But my husband and I are moving to Europe for a period of about 2 years or so. From next month, we are moving to Europe.
Oh my goodness, that's exciting.
Which is super exciting. So we're going to do that. And I'm planning on continuing to do a bunch of my work in Australia from over there. I recently started an industry organization called the Digital Publishers Alliance, which is a great industry body of the leading independent digital publishers in the country. So I'm doing that. I'll continue to do that from overseas and come back to Australia about every quarter to do hopefully some in real life talks and workshops and things like that, just to keep the connection with Australia, but whilst also seeing the world.
Yeah, that sounds really exciting. Whereabouts in Europe are you heading to?
You'll be sorry that you asked. We're going to the Greek islands for a couple of months.
Oh, I am sorry I asked.
Yeah. Every time anyone asks me, I'm like, do you really want to hear?
Do you really want to know?
We're going to go to Scotland. My husband's Scottish, so to Scotland for a little bit to be with his family, then
Yeah.
Greek islands for a couple of months, and then we'll probably settle somewhere in Spain. Yeah, so we're kind of keeping a pretty open thing, and I will write my third book whilst I'm working and traveling around from overseas, which is pretty fun. I think I'm also just excited that the world feels like it's reopening slowly, and that has just got me excited. We're meant to do this in 2020, so it's really our delayed trip a couple of years later.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, have an amazing time. And look, when you do write your next book, maybe you can come and visit us on the Gold Coast.
I would love to come and visit. Yeah, I would love to come and visit on the Gold Coast. You can make us
jealous with all your travel stories as well.
Yes, hopefully you'll be doing in-person events then as well. And
well, we are now, but we're still doing a few virtual, and obviously it can be easy for people who are in Sydney, such as yourself tonight. So I would just like to check that everyone, it would be great to have your book in high schools to help students look for different ways of thinking. Yes, that is very true.
I totally agree, Sunny. I think if I was taught this in school, this would be a lot more useful than some of the stuff that I was taught in school.
Yeah, definitely. I agree.
Yeah.
And because so I'll just summarize, killer thinking, it's clear, it's simple steps. And not only is it inspirational and so informative, but you've got IRL or in real life exercises and worksheets throughout, so you can really practice getting your creativity flowing. So I highly recommend reading this book. I have put in the link in the chat to purchase the title from Booktopia. I think it's worth purchasing. You can borrow from the library as well, of course, but so great to be able to write notes in it and use those worksheets as well, and sort of scribble throughout the book as you go. So please do head and buy that book, and also Cult Status as well. So congratulations again, Tim, on your new title, Killer Thinking. We really appreciate you joining us tonight, and we do hope to see you soon for your third book, and have a wonderful trip.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the chat. And as I don't care if you hire it from the library or buy it, it's just as long as you get the information and start using it. That's what I really love. Yeah. Just use this information.